Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community and Environment Scrutiny Panel. So we're going to do some housekeeping before we do the introductions. So as far as I'm aware, there is no fire practice expected, but if the alarm sounds, can we all present leave the building as quickly as possible by the way of the nearest exit? The designated assembly point is in the public square in front of CAS, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. No roll call will be undertaken. If anybody has mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. Can I ask now on for mobile phones if anyone would be able to switch their phone to silent mode or off, please, during today's meeting. And this meeting will be visually and audio recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. So can I ask all present to use their microphones by clicking on the red button to ensure audio can be captured when speaking today. I don't think we have any members of the public today, have we? No. Okay, so let's go straight into introductions before agenda. So I'm Councillor Gemma Cobby, Chair of the Scrutiny Panel today.
Nigel Cannings, Vice Chair.
Can I just ask to use the red buttons when you introduce it? Yep, John.
I'm sorry, I'm Ken Guest, I'm Ward Councillor for Rossington and Bawtry.
Councillor Debbie Hutchinson, Adwick and Carcroft Ward.
James Church, the Bentley Ward.
Steve Cox, Finley Ward.
Morning, I'm Christine Rothwell and I support the scrutiny function.
Hi, I'm Karen Shootram, Domestic and Sexual Abuse Service Manager at Doncaster Council.
Hello, Jane Mundine, Public Health Improvement Coordinator for Substance Misuse with a special focus on the drug side.
Yeah, morning everybody. Andy Collins, Public Health Coordinator with a particular focus on reducing alcohol-related harm here for Doncaster Council. We are actually filling in for Helen Conroy today, who can't make the meeting.
Good morning, Sir Tom Bright, with DCI, Detective Chief Inspector work at Doncaster for South Yorkshire Police.
Good morning, Pete Thorpe, Superintendent. I've got responsibilities for the delivery of operational policing in Doncaster.
Good morning, Chair. Bill Hotchkiss, Head of Community Safety in Doncaster City Centre with the City of Doncaster Council.
Morning, Dan Swain, Director Police, Doncaster City Council.
Thank you. Okay, so apologies for absence. I've got 3 apologies. That's from Councillor Emma Mudderman-Rawlins, Councillor Amy Dixon and Councillor David Nevitt. So we have no press, public and press to be excluded from this meeting, so we have none here, so that's not a problem. Declarations of interest, if any. Myself, I've been involved with one of the community groups regards to violence against women and girls, so that's declaration and interest for mine. I don't know if anyone else has any on the panel, but if you do, please contact Christine Rothwell, who is sat behind me just after the meeting, if you have. Okay, so if we look at agenda point 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th February and the 5th October last year on 2023. Does the panel agree and second the minutes? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, public statements. I don't think we have any public statements. Okay, so if we move on to the crime and community safety report, so I'm handing over to the officers opposite me.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, councillors. Thanks for the opportunity of coming along today and giving a presentation about the work of the Doncaster Community Safety Partnership and an update around our priorities. We've got an assembled panel today which covers a number of specialist areas, from the police to substance misuse and domestic abuse. Rachel's kindly offered to operate the PowerPoint today as well, and Rachel's done a lot of the work in terms of pulling the presentation together, so thank you for that, Rachel. In terms of the topics to be covered today, we're going to give an overview around crime and antisocial behaviour, and obviously cover the themes around substance misuse and domestic and sexual abuse. But I thought it would be useful just to give a little bit of a reminder of the Safer, Stronger Doncaster Partnership priorities and some of the headline updates. So our priorities at the moment are reducing antisocial behaviour, which includes the city centre, which I'm now responsible for, tackling domestic and sexual abuse, tackling serious and organised crime, and reducing substance misuse and alcohol misuse, and that includes that additional focus on the treatment and recovery system model, which Jane and Andy will give an update about a little bit later, and also reducing crime and reoffending, and that includes the action plan to support reductions in reoffending, which Tom will be talking about. So hopefully the presentation will flow nicely. We've got Pete that's going to be kicking us off talking about the overall crime data, and we've agreed that the questions that have been provided to us, hopefully some of those will be addressed in the presentation. However, at the end of the meeting, when we've done the presentation, we're happy to go through the questions and provide response if that's okay, Chair. So I'll just hand over to Pete now, who can take us through some of the crime data.
Thanks, Bill. So the first slide, as you can see, we're reporting overall decrease in crime reported for the period, which is 23 compared to 22. Which is a 2.5% decrease compared to the force-wide decrease, which was seen at 1.7%. As you can see on the table at the bottom of your slide, currently we saw some peaks in reporting in January and February of 2023, which was above the previous reporting year, but then consistently reductions thereafter, with the biggest reduction in crime coming in December 23 compared to December 22. As you can see there at the bottom with a 13.9% change. The crime in Doncaster equates to around 26.9% of all of South Yorkshire Police's recorded crime, and actually only exceeded by Sheffield, which accounts for 39% of overall crime in South Yorkshire. As you can see there, in the last year, Doncaster has seen a decrease in almost all of crime types, with the exception of shoplifting and business robberies, theft from the person, and rape, as well as possession of drugs. And we're going to talk a little bit more in detail around some of those points in the following slides. But we have seen some decreases, as you can see, in relation to vehicle offences, with a 14% reduction, a reduction in terms of violence around 4%, reductions in arson and criminal damage offences by 13%, burglaries have dropped by 7% and public order by 11%. So there is some positives in there, and I'll talk through the issues around where we've seen those increases. If you want to take us to the next slide, please. So when we look at some of those increases, when we talk about serious acquisitive crime in total, we can see there that we've had some rises in some of those offending types. We're consistent in Doncaster with the wider South Yorkshire Police Force area in terms of those increases, but those increases have been definitely driven by certain offence types, which is on the next slide. You can see there in January and February of 23 and July and September of 23, we had significantly higher rates of some SAT crime, which was driving some of that data to an increase of 4.5%, and that predominantly sits around retail crime-based offences. You can see that we equate to around 27.6% of total recorded crime, and is only exceeded within Sheffield in terms of serious acquisitive crime at 41.3%. And the table at the bottom there, you can see that brought out in terms of raw numbers. So the 4.5% increase is a difference between 13,796 crimes in the year of 22 compared to 14,411 crimes in the year of 23. Can you take us on to the next slide, please? So where we've seen some really positive reductions in terms of our residential burglary rate, so this is people's homes being burgled and connected outbuildings, we've seen a 9% decrease. That's on the back of a significant investment that we've made locally to tackle residential burglary. So we're pleased to see those sharp decreases, and that sits above the decreases, or if any decreases being seen in the wider South Yorkshire area. Doncaster has seen the largest reduction in residential burglary in the year 23 compared to 22. In terms of business burglary, that's remained consistent. You can see there a consistent number of personal robberies have been committed to, but there has been a significant increase in business robbery. Business robbery is essentially shop theft, but where there's an element of some sort of threat being made to the worker in the shop, or violence being used in relation towards the worker in the shop. That is really consistent, I guess, with the rise that we've seen in shopliftings. There is some issues around the crime recording standards around business robbery, in that if there's a threat made to a shop assistant or a worker in that shop, that would be claimed as a robbery. There might not necessarily be any actual violence used in the commission of the offence, but that's why we've seen that change, I think, in that significant increase in the reports of business robbery. We have been alive to that increase, certainly across the summer of last year, and we've done some internal audit work, for example, we've seen us review a number of business robberies. And actually, when we've looked at a cohort of offending, very few have actually had weapons and or violence actually used. The 12 cases that we reviewed, only one had the presence of a weapon, and one was where actual violence was used when a delivery van was taken from the delivery driver. The other 10 offences were essentially shoplifting offences, but where there's been a threat made to the worker in the shop. In terms of those thefts, though, you can see the significant increase in the purporting of thefts in the retail crime section. That really peaked in the summer of last year. What we have seen since August time is a significant decrease, albeit the rate is still above previous year reporting rates. And we're attributing that partly down to the wider environmental factors such as the cost of living crisis. But there is an awful lot of work going on in force, which I know there's some questions around retail crime, which we can talk at the end if you wish, around some of the extra work that we're doing in relation to that. It has seen us invest more staff, for example, into the city centre to tackle that problem with some dedicated resources as well. And that came in the summer, and I think that's seen that driving down of some of that rate from the peak in certainly July, August time. You can see there that there's been a modest increase in theft from the person, but we're talking relatively small numbers in terms of those offences. A decrease in bicycle theft and an overall decrease in other wider reported theft. Thank you. So moving on to the domestic and sexual abuse section, we report in the year 23 a reduction of 7.4% in the recording of crime in relation to domestic and sexual abuse in the year, which is ahead of the overall force average, which has seen a reduction of 4.4%. You can see there that we have decreased across some of the considered period, but we did see an increase in 4 of the first 5 months before a high point in June, and then a consistent decrease in the latter half of 2023. In terms of this offending type, again, similar numbers to the others. It's 26.8% of the overall crime of this crime types in SYP, and again, with Sheffield being the ahead at 35.1%. You can see there that we've had decreases in the reporting of domestic offences. Violence in particular saw a drop of 6.5%, or equivalent of 342 offences, and that's been mainly driven by a 13% drop in domestic violence without injury type offences. And in terms of sexual offences, we saw really no change, and I know there's some questions being raised, particularly around an increase in reporting of rape, which I can talk to at the end. But overall, domestic sexual offences saw a significant drop of 15%. And actually, Doncaster was the only district within South Yorkshire Police to see that decrease happening in that crime type. So there is some positives there as well. And now I'm going to hand over to Karen to talk through the next couple of slides.
Thank you. So this slide just gives you a flavour for some of the work that we did in 2023 on domestic and sexual abuse. We're still working towards the Doncaster domestic abuse strategy, with the key objectives around prevention, supporting victims, working with perpetrators, and then that governance structure. So there's a lot of work around trying to ensure that all agencies have got policies and procedures and training for staff. So that's where the domestic abuse charter comes in. A lot of work with schools on the domestic and sexual abuse toolkit for schools to help them better identify and respond to domestic and sexual abuse for young people and families. Launched a new scheme called Safe at Home to help keep support victims to stay in their own property by making the property more secure. And then lots and lots of comms work throughout the year to keep raising awareness of domestic abuse and the services available, and sexual abuse as well. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour for some of the key work. And then on the next slide, that just goes through some of the key things that we're working on this year. So we will soon be launching a new domestic abuse film. We're just waiting for the last few touches to be put onto it. We're going to be ensuring that it's got British Sign Language and subtitles, so that's just the finishing touches for that. We are implementing training for professionals on supporting some of our sex workers, and we've done a really exciting piece of work with some of the Doncaster sex workers around their experiences, their journey through life and how it's led to them becoming sex workers, and the ask of professionals really about how we can support them better moving forward. We've had an independent review of the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference with a number of recommendations to improve that process for high-risk victims of domestic abuse. We're going to continue to work with agencies to achieve the 5 standards that are set out in the Domestic Abuse Charter that's in our strategy. And we're working on new action plans for 24-25 for domestic and sexual abuse, including intersectionality to make sure that we're best supporting removing barriers for all people within our communities. The other big thing that we're working on at the moment is a restructure of the Council's domestic abuse service to ensure that we're providing as better service as as good a service as we can for our victims.
Thanks, Karen. Just moving on then to looking at the subgroup around reducing violence and violent crime and the key work that's been happening within that group. So we have seen in the year 23 a 16% reduction in the recording of volume of most serious violence per 1,000 of the population. We have continued to drive the work through the nighttime economy subgroup. That has some clear links within the city centre and outlying establishments and has membership from ourselves at SYP, but also within local enforcement, licensing and other facets of the local authority and other agencies. So that's a broad multi-agency approach to how we police and deal with the nighttime economy within the city. You can see there that we've had a successful ongoing working successfully in partnership to manage that increased activity, such as around St Ledger and the Christmas New Year periods. That's seen additional patrols from the police, but also the implementation of the Safe Haven bus, the continuation of the city centre taxi marshals, and we're seeing those as really positive, some of the positive contributors to that violence in reduction that we've seen across the city. You can see there that we've ran an event in May with our hospitality and licensed premises colleagues, and there's further events planned around the security staff and other businesses such as taxi firms and those wider people involved in the nighttime economy such as takeaways, etc., as we move into this year. We've also purchased a number of ID scanners, and I know there's a separate question about it which I'll address at the end around the effectiveness of them and what they do, but we are seeing some real drive behind the presence of those 5 venues taking those scanners on. We're doing a lot of work with local schools in terms of informing them around trauma-informed services, providing funding and training and resources to take place as an early preventative measure. The VOG delivery plan has been developed and mapping exercise has been done to identify those aspects of VOG not already being tackled within the wider strategies of the Safer, Stronger Doncaster partnership. And no doubt that will aid will aid us in prioritising work moving forward. We continue to fund victim support services in relation to non-domestic abuse stalking advocates. We secured funding through round 5 of the Safer Streets Fund, which is helping to go towards improving open spaces and CCTV provision across the whole borough. And we continue to support the funding around EPIC within the city centre, who provide that diversion educational support to young people through this financial year, and that will continue into the next financial year as well, which I know is one of your questions, which we'll cover later.
So I'm going to give Pete and Karen a rest now and pick up the presentation in terms of antisocial behaviour. So during the current period, which is up to January 23 to December 23, I'll touch on more recent ASB data as we go through it. The current period saw an increase in force-wide antisocial behaviour incidents, and Doncaster increased by just over 14%, which was larger than the Forces increase. We know that Doncaster Council reports up to November also indicate a slight increase in reporting of 5%. This is something that we expect at this time of year with bonfire night and Halloween up to that period. But when we've done some more recent work on antisocial behaviour, and I did a presentation yesterday to Exec Board, it has actually started to come down for both ourselves, South Yorkshire Police and also St Ledger Homes as well. The highest increase, 32.6%, was noted in December 23 compared to December 22, and those categories that saw an increase were street drinking. We'll touch upon that in more detail in terms of some of the questions, and off-road bikes and quad activity, which is a feature across all areas of Doncaster. All months across 2022 saw an increase against the same month last year, with the exception of January 23. And then we've got some reductions around prostitution-related ASB, litter and drugs trappings, which is a drugs paraphernalia that we often see found. Rowdy, inconsiderate behaviour, fireworks and noise also saw a decrease during this period. And the table there just shows some illustration of what those changes were. Street drinking saw a significant rise in Conisbrough, 6%, and Town Ward as well, although the proportions are low compared to other ASB incidents across the borough. Off-road bikes, mentioned earlier, that's seen a significant rise across the borough. Only 2 wards saw a drop. It's expected that rural areas and large estates are more affected than the city centre, as shown by the top 3 wards being Norton and Asken, Adwickley Street, Carcroft, Balby South, and those off-road bikes and quads make up nearly 30% of all ASB incidents, and that's up from 20% in the previous period. We've actually put together a separate tasking group under the ASB theme group, and they've been set up to try and tackle the issue more effectively and look at more innovative powers and tools to tackle off-road bikes and quad bikes. Next slide, please, Rachel. So this is a bit more of a focus on the city centre. Over the Christmas period and school holidays, there's been an increase in youth-related ASB in the French Gate Centre and interchange. We've done some work on this, and we've had a partnership meeting linking in with the French Gate Centre and also the interchange. The police have been involved. We've been involved from a city centre perspective, and also Team Epic have been involved as well. We've got a hub inside the French Gate Centre. We do know that this is a different cohort of young people that's involved to the issues we experienced in 2022. But what we have done is, as part of that ASB partnership, is reinvigorated the response with a range of interventions, preventions, engagement and enforcement activity. And that includes some weekends of action. So we've had additional police patrols in the French Gate Centre. We've engaged with businesses and communities, some diversion activities through Epic, and the case management of young people as well. And what we're also doing is linking in with schools where we've identified individuals from local schools. And what we'll also be doing is some home visits to some of the young people involved, so that we can actually involve the parents as well to make sure they're aware of the activities that's taking place in the French Gate Centre. So through that grip, we've established the links between the police, the French Gate Centre, our own staff and Epic as well. And then some of the work that I know is going to come up as a question is the French Gate Centre are looking at zoning off some areas of the French Gate which aren't public rights of way, but that makes it easier for them to patrol from a security perspective. But I'll touch upon that a little bit later through some of the questions. And then we've got some other wider issues of place-based issues which are covered on the next slide. And this is the work of the theme group and some key work across the borough now. So we're moving from the city centre across the rest of the borough, and taking you through some of the headlines of the ASB theme group. We've got the launch of the See Me For Me film, which is aimed at increasing awareness and skills of professionals working with individuals involved in sex work. The integration with the Amber Project, a new Aspire outreach team, focusing on entrenched substance misusers. We've got successful delivery of days of action, which are targeting untaxed and abandoned vehicles and illegal repairs on the highway, speeding and illegal parking, which is an issue that's been raised from a local perspective. In terms of positives, we know that through some intensive work on the Skylarks estate, which is a new estate just on the outskirts of Adwickley Street, that's been managed through a problem-oriented policing plan and some place-based plan with the local community staff as well. And again, around Highfields, there's been some work in relation to additional patrols in Highfields and joint visibility and engagement across stronger communities. But we know that some of those challenges still remain in Highfields and Woodlands area as well. So that work is continuing. Street drinking plans in Conisbrough, and again, that's joint work between the local area team and the local police. That is based around enforcement and engagement with a small cohort of individuals that's been responsible for complaints from local businesses who are engaged in street drinking. And through use of that engagement and some enforcement, it's actually led to a reduction in antisocial behaviour in that area. In terms of the reduction in ASB and damage on the Calm estate at Armthorpe, working with St Ledger Homes, one property has been closed using ASB tools and powers, which has had an impact in the area. And then we've had 4 days of action, which saw increased visibility and engagement, joint operations from officers within Stronger Communities team, St Ledger Homes and the enforcement team. And again, that was focused on in the Armthorpe area. So off-road bikes, again, related to ASB, continues to be a key driver for ASB rates, and that's something that the ASB theme group is very much focused on in terms of raising awareness and looking at progressing an educational video through the EPIC team for young people to raise awareness of the dangers of off-road bikes and also some of the legislation that applies to the use of them as well. The Safer Neighbourhood Service Hub is actually it's a police hub which is located in this civic office just next to where we work on floor 2. And that group deal with some of the more complex cases of antisocial behaviour. And what we do is we have a regular monthly meeting which involves the police, the city centre team, the area teams and St Ledger Homes, where we look at those more complex cases and from a partnership perspective how we can best tackle that location or the individual that's involved. So that's working really well. And we can use all sorts of tools and powers and civil interventions to drive forward the work of that group. So that's touching on antisocial behaviour. Another area that relates to our priorities is tackling serious and organised crime. And I work really closely with police colleagues, including Tom, who's on the panel today. So in terms of serious and organised crime, some of the key strategic work that we do, it's quite a highly sensitive area of policing and partnership working. So there are difficulties around what level of detail we can report, as you can imagine. But in terms of our overall strategy, we use the 4P approach, which is about pursuing, preventing, protecting and preparing. And a lot of that, certainly from a partnership perspective, is involving disruption of organised crime groups in Doncaster. Currently, Doncaster's got 11 mapped organised crime groups, and to give you some idea of the level of individuals that's involved, that's around 170 people within those groups. That figure can go up and down, but generally speaking, it's around that number. But the pleasing news is that's a reduction of 3 from the previous reporting period. So what that means effectively is that threat, harm and risk presented by some of those groups has been reduced, and that is down to some of that 4P approach, you know, the disruption and some of the police enforcement action as well in terms of putting some of these key nominals behind bars, and that's why there's been a reduction there in terms of those groups. We've got a very successful tactical bronze meeting, which is well attended by partners. At this information, obviously we share more sensitive information, and we develop tactical initiatives. I know later on we'll be able to talk through some of the examples of how those partnership operations have come to fruition. So last year, between July 22 and July 23, there was 78 partnership interventions recorded, and through that, 219 warrants of arrests were made linked to organised crime activity. A lot of those warrants and arrests have led to some substantial prison sentences for the people involved. And the 78 partnership interventions, I know from working with colleagues in other parts of South Yorkshire that Doncaster is certainly at the top of the tree in terms of our partnership interventions, and that's down to the partnership working that we've got in Doncaster. Whilst challenges still remain, the reduction in number of groups is a positive outcome, and that's a reduced threat, harm and risk to some of the communities in Doncaster. So if I may now, I'm going to pass on to my colleagues in public health who are going to take us through some of the reducing substance and alcohol key work. Thanks, Jane and Andy.
Thank you, Bill. So some of the key work that were listed on there that we'll talk about. So the first one is Rethink Your Drink campaign. That continues to be delivered for the next 2 years by our Dash Communications team. We've had some additional staff recruited in EPIC and the Specialist Young People's Treatment Service. That equates to 5 members of staff, which also includes a Family Moving On Together coordinator to really push that programme. We've got the capacity of the Criminal Justice Intervention Services increasing, and also sustaining the original funding for that. Services targeting those where substance misuse is associated with offending behaviour. That equates in numbers to 10 workers since 2021 additional. We've established alcohol early interventions targeting higher risk drinkers and liaising with primary care for that one. This aims to tackle the drinking problems early before people become physically dependent, so trying to get upstream. We've also got an outreach team that Bill mentioned earlier in Aspire. That's established and recruited too. We've had monthly meetings for that, and the feedback, it's going really well.
Yes, so just the next one is intervention and enforcement work, and includes says there, drug warrants, drug dog operation, days of action, and Aspire do get involved in the days of action. They provide pop-up hubs. There was one last year in Mexborough, so they're there to support service users who are struggling at that time. If the police then catch the people that are dealing the drugs, so it's almost like a mop-up exercise, which works really well. So the complex lives, that's one-to-one case support and outreach dropping every Friday morning. So that's going really well. Aspire now have a hub based at the complex, the Changing Lives building, which is on Princess Street. So we've invested heavily in that, Jane, haven't we, over the last year? I just want to emphasise that a lot of this investment is coming from the drug strategy that came out two or 3 years ago now, and Doncaster got approximately around an extra £6 million over 3 years. So we're really invested heavily in this. A lot of it has gone towards extra staff to cater for hopefully the increased demand into services. So the collaboration with the Violence Reduction Unit within the nighttime economy, it's already been touched on around the Safe Haven bus. So the Safe Haven bus is a partnership between Ardash, Public Health, Street Pastors, Pub Watch, and South Yorkshire Police. Last year, it was in the town centre or the city centre 8 times last year on targeted nights, which tends to be around Sundays or bank holiday Sundays, Ledger Week, and also Easter kind of bank holidays as well. So, but next year hopefully it's going to be on 20 times. So if you don't know about it, it is the bus that's parked in the city centre, and it provides a pastoral approach. It's funded by the Violence Reduction Unit around the violence and women and girls agenda. So it provides, there's always 2 females on the bus, and it provides a safe haven for especially women if they're in distress in the city centre. So that's a really good initiative, and we want to continue with that. So the Combating Drugs Partnership, as it says up there, established in 2022, chaired by the Director of Public Health, or the Acting Director of Public Health now. Me and Jane put together a drug and alcohol needs assessment, which has been written, and recommendations there how we can improve where Doncaster is in regard to both nationally and locally around getting more people into treatment and reducing the harm to communities and individuals for drugs and alcohol. We can share that. We're happy to share that. There is a kind of a smaller version of the 90-page one that we have condensed it down, but happy to share that if people want that.
Yep. Next slide, please. Yep, so the model for the Doncaster treatment recovery system has been completely revised. I appreciate there is a question around that, which we can talk in more detail. But the key elements of delivery are to improve capacity, as Andy's touched on, the quality and the ease of access into treatment. So some of that is around rapid access and lowering those thresholds. So before there was a lot of assessments. Some of the feedback from clients was around, felt like they were hoop jumping, frankly. So it's about getting that rapid access clinics in place, and we've got plans to expand that as well. We've initially started with the cohorts, sort of like your more complex opiate users, and feedback is that they are getting the immediate treatment with a prescription that they need, and then obviously assessments will come later for that extra interventions that can be offered. We've already touched on the outreach development. That team is targeting initially a sex worker cohort, homeless, domestic abuse, and some GP engagement, but we're wanting to expand that further. Increasing numbers in treatment. So Andy's touched on with the supplemental grant from the strategy, that is the main target, about increasing numbers into treatment. We know it's protective, and we know that if we can get them in, even if we appreciate it's a complex relapsing condition, once they're in, hopefully then we can make some inroads into being able to treat them effectively. We're increasing the engagement with women BAME and LGBT underserved groups, as that's come out in the health needs assessment. Localities and partnership working to improve the geographical access points. We appreciate that substance misuse features heavily within our localities plans, and we're working together in partnership on that.
So I just want to go back to increasing numbers into treatment. So as Jane mentioned, the supplemental monies, the focus is on opiate users getting into treatment. But I just want to identify that we've seen since pre-pandemic, alcohol use, alcohol to people into treatment has gone up over 100%. So that's a big jump there, and also non-opiates and alcohol. I mean, that's gone up nigh on 200%. So there's definitely some work that we need to do around opiates, because opiates has kind of stayed quite static. So there's definitely work that we need to do, and that is certainly around the outreach development, the extra staff that we've funded into Aspire as well. So yeah, and just finally there, I mean, expansion of the availability of new opiate prescribing options. So Buvidal is proving really popular for that. That's for people who struggle with daily take of methadone, and it's just a depot injection that can last. It's 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to make it as easy as possible for people to engage into services and use the services effectively and come out the other side.
And just to touch on that depot injection, it is available at Aspire, but it's also available via our local prison releases, because we're very mindful about increasing the continuity of care options. It isn't across all prisons, unfortunately, nationally, but it is for our local ones. So we've got that pathway in place.
So just again, you touched on prisons, don't we? I don't know whether we're going to come to it on the slide, Jane, but there's something that we're measured on. It's called continuity of care. So that's when people leave prison, we're getting effectively into community drug treatment. So we're doing really well here in Doncaster. We are doing better than the Yorkshire and Humber. We're doing better than national. I think we're at 63% here at Doncaster, and the Yorkshire and Humber is at 50%. So we are doing some really good work, because that's a really difficult and that's the wrong word, not difficult, but a crucial time when people leave prison. And we need to really get them back into Aspire straight away. So we know that people leave the jail and they'll get met somewhere, or they'll get to the railway station, they'll meet somewhere and go back to the old ways. So it's a really crucial thing that we need to work on that and improve those figures.
Yeah, still work to do. The government target is 75%, but we're getting there.
Anything else?
So implementing the findings of the local health determinants research collaboration that we did on representations. So some of what, when we were doing the health needs assessment and our ongoing work that we do as commissioners of Aspire, although we appreciate it is a chronically relapsing condition, we were noting that there were quite a few representations in the service, so where they come back round and re-enter again. So we wanted to unpick that wider. So we've got a health determinants research collaboration within public health and within Doncaster Council. And we got them to basically have interviews with some individuals to see what was actually going on there. So it was support for wider determinants of health that was needed, and improving linkages with an access to mental health support, which we know isn't a new one, but it's around those recommendations so that we can put that into the new model, and follow up and fast tracking on re-entry. So again, some of what we've changed in the model is around being able to get that rapid access, not having to kind of go back round and do all the assessments again. It's about trying to get them in treatment and trying to get them the help that they need, and improved post-discharge support.
So just on that, so a representation is classed as somebody who's left treatment in a planned way, but then come back round within 6 months. So we wanted to know, what is out there that's causing these people to come back round and start using drugs and alcohol again. So that HDRC research was really, really informative for us to then include it in our the treatment plan for the new contract, which is due to start in April.
Thank you.
Right, so I'll talk through the reducing crime and reoffending subgroup. It's a fairly large topic area, reducing crime and reoffending. So really, I'll focus mostly on IOM. So I'll actually ask if we can go to the next slide just so I can explain. So there are a lot of individuals who are released from prison in Doncaster, as anywhere. IOM is an initiative that's put together that manages the most prolific and most sort of high-risk offenders in terms of reoffending. So you can see there are 209 offenders in Doncaster who are within the IOM Integrated Offender Management Cohort. They're actually broken into 3 separate sections. So when we're talking about managing reoffending in Doncaster, a lot of work goes into these 209 individuals who are at sort of greatest risk of reoffending. In terms of how it works, anyone who's released from prison, their previous and their offending is all fed into a sort of matrix, and it gives them a score. So the fixed cohort, as you can see there, contains 42 individuals. They are the highest risk of reoffending, so they score over 75 on the matrix. The flex cohort, which contains 48, are those that score between 74 and 65 in terms of that risk of reoffending. And the free cohort is up to the police and probation service to nominate, and that it tends to be DA offenders. So what you actually see is your fixed cohort tends to contain perhaps more burglars, those who can be convicted of robbery, the more serious offences. The flex cohort contains those who generally are prolific shoplifters, which will be relevant when we come to talk about reoffending, and then the free cohort commit DA. I'll stick on the slide for the moment, and we'll sort of go through it. So what this is telling us is that the first table at the top is talking about, so if we look at those who are within that cohort, when they go onto it and they are managed, one thing we want to see is that their offending reduces. So we've seen that in the fixed cohort, our highest risk offenders, and we've seen that in our free cohort. Some challenge for us in terms of the flex cohort, who, when they're put onto IOM and are being managed quite intrusively, are actually committing slightly more offences than they did when they went onto it. A challenge for us, for me, that is linked to shoplifting. So our prolific shoplifters, you've seen a 53% increase in shoplifting across Doncaster, and that reflects a national trend. So more work to do for this subgroup with the flex cohort and around shoplifting. I think we'll have some additional questions around retail crime. We can talk about the police's plans around that. So that's what that first table is telling us, is 2 out of the 3 groups are committing less offences than when they first were managed. The second table, people can't be on the IOM cohort forever. We want to see them managed, reduce their offending and then taken off. So the second table is looking at, if we look at their offending rate before they were onto that cohort versus their offending rate when they've been taken off, has it reduced? Because we want to see it reduce, because it's a sign that things are working. You can see that all 3 cohorts, if we track who's come off it, they are reducing in their reoffending, which for us is a real positive. I know I've gone slightly out of order. If you go up one slide, I think that's important context for the work the reoffending group do. So the Reducing Crime Reoffending Group really, one of the main things it does is bring together all the partners who can assist in managing the behaviour of those who are on the IOM scheme. So probation have an aspiration or a target to offer 3 appointments a week to anyone on their fixed cohort. That can be mental health, it can be drugs with Aspire, it can be an appointment with housing, because the more support that we can put in place, the less likely they are to reoffend. Really important work of that group is to bring everybody together so we can offer those appointments. At the moment we're around 2.3, so not quite at the 3 mark, and that's one of the things the group is just trying to increase the support to those in Doncaster. Probation also has, so the second bullet point, referral pathway established. So probation have commissioned rehabilitative services, which is a company that assists them in supporting those that are within the IOM cohort. The next bullet point, each neighbourhood policing team tackles serious acquisitive crime through problem-solving plans and identified patrol areas to manage crime hotspots. So this is more the police initiative. So we have overnight hotspots. They're reviewed every 2 weeks. We tend to have 5 or 6 of them where we know that we have the most serious acquisitive crime, and we seek to put our officers, particularly overnight, but throughout the day, into those areas to try and catch offenders and deter further offending taking place. In addition to that, there is longer term work going on in the background around some of our areas where we get persistent hotspots. That tends to do with issues around perhaps the layout of the streets, street lighting, alley gates, and so the neighbourhood teams are engaged in problem solving in our highest hotspots areas. And we've just launched a new programme called Hawkeye, which is designed to target South Yorkshire but Doncaster's sort of persistent hotspots in terms of crime. And the other thing, I think Mr Thorpe has referenced that we have a dedicated burglary team that looks at burglary patterns. So in terms of us reducing crime reoffending, actually having a dedicated team who can spot that the the same offenders are committing. So there might be a vehicle link, or it might be clothing, or it might be the same tools are being used. That dedicated burglary team, which we put in place in the last year, is paying dividends, and I think we've seen that in the reduction of burglary. It's a 9% reduction in burglary this year, which is a real positive. The fourth bullet point around Doncaster, so that's South Yorkshire's IOM team, is recognised as standout within South Yorkshire. They are a really sort of productive team. They average about 500 arrests a year for various different offences, so ensure some really good compliance, or where people don't comply, that they are dealt with and put in front of the courts as soon as possible. They conduct curfew checks, joint visits with probation. They are co-located with probation, so they work together very closely. So that's a real positive for us. The next bullet point, Doncaster works to the key milestones of the IOM strategy. So we didn't always have the fixed, flex and free. That didn't always exist, so that's been introduced in the last few years. So that's just being embedded and is now up and running. The last three bullet points all relate to the close working of the Youth Offending Service, probation and the police. So it's really important that those services are joined up. So, and I think particularly when people move from youth offending through to probation, that there is a smooth transition, because it can be a bit bumpy if it's not managed properly. So to manage that, the police have got an embedded officer within the Youth Offending Service, there is a Youth Offending SPOC within the Probation Service, and there is a worker from the Youth Offending Service working in probation. So there is a real triangulation, if you like, between those three services to provide a joined up approach. So that, I think there was a question about how we manage reoffending, but that is key for us, that working between the services. Next slide, please. Well, we talked about that. Next slide. So the last slide is just the action plan in terms of what the group is going to be doing going forwards. One key thing is if you're going to offer appointments to people, and you're going to have probation are going to be offering things with Aspire or things with housing, there needs to be information sharing agreements with any partner that we're using. So one of the key things that the group is doing is to make sure that there are information sharing agreements with anyone who is able to support that IOM cohort in Doncaster. So that's an ongoing piece of work. We've already heard in terms of the drugs update about the continuity of care process in terms of the prison estates. One thing I'll highlight is that HMP Doncaster has a departure lounge, so where somebody is released, rather than just push them out the door, they have what's called a departure lounge, where a range of services and appointments are available to them on the point of release. So rather than say, come into Doncaster Town Centre and go and have your first drugs appointment, where we are introducing potential failure, they can have that appointment with Aspire in the prison. So we're trying to set people up to succeed, not to fail. So I think that's again a real positive. Point 3, there is ongoing work led by the head of probation around housing at Doncaster. There is challenges around housing everywhere, but we know that if we can get people discharged from prison into housing rather than being of no fixed address, it does reduce the reoffending rate. That's not an easy one to resolve, and I know there have been lots of meetings and discussions around how we can improve that. I don't think I've got the solution here and now as to how we solve issues in terms of housing pressures, but it's something that the group is very keenly monitoring. And the last 2 points are tied together, so 4 and 5, so delivery of drug testing by the probation service and increasing the volumes of community sentence treatments. We know, and you've heard here, that reoffending around drugs is really, so drugs is one of the main drivers of our serious acquisitive crime. If we can tackle sort of the cause of offending in terms of drug treatment, it helps us to reduce crime. So the courts are beginning to introduce more community sentence treatments, one of which is a drugs testing requirement. So probation have now all been upskilled in terms of completing those drug tests. So rather than just try and investigate our way out of serious acquisitive crime, I think it's about tackling it from all angles. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. If you want to turn your... thank you, Tom. So the final slide is really a summary slide which draws together a lot of the key points that's been presented today from that presentation. I'll quickly go through them because I know we need to leave some time for questions as well, which is really important. So we've seen that overall there's been a decrease in reported crime. We heard about that from Pete, which is good news. We know there's been an increase in business robberies, but we understand why and what that's linked to. We know that reports of nuisance off-road bikes and quad bikes is a big issue across Doncaster, and we've talked about that. And the issues we're dealing with in the Frenchgate Centre relating to youth-related ASB, where we've got a response in place for that, which is based around a partnership and working with the Frenchgate Centre and the interchange. We've heard the positive news about the overall decrease in reported domestic crime, which is a similar pattern to what's been seen across South Yorkshire, and there's been no change in terms of the reported sexual offences, again seeing a similar figure across the force. We've done some detailed presentation around the organised crime activity and the way we deal with organised crime, and again there's some positive news to report there in terms of reduction in the overall number of mapped organised crime groups, and we can see that some really pleasing data in relation to the volume of most serious violence incidents, where again we've seen a big reduction, over around 16% in the volume of reported serious violence incidents per 1,000 population. And Tom's talked in detail about the work of the integrated offender management team, and that's been recognised as a standout team in South Yorkshire. And we've talked about the numbers of people that's actually been monitored through that and the way that they are managed through that scheme. So that slide is very much a roundup of what you've heard today. I'm sorry that it is quite a detailed slide, but there actually is an awful lot to cover in relation to the amount of activity that's taking place. And I'd like to thank the panel members who've come along today and presented that. So, Chair, if I may, I will certainly hand over now to the important part, which is around the questions that anybody might have about the presentation, and then some of the questions we've been supplied with beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panel, for the presentation. It's been very interesting, and I know some of it's starting to address some of the questions we have today. So I'll start with questions. So we talked about earlier at the start of the presentation about some of the high numbers of crime. Obviously, there was a general decrease in overall crime, which is good to see across Doncaster, and it's part of the work that you've done as the panel. But I know we touched a bit on retail crime, and our last meeting was a lot heavy on discussing retail crime, and I know you've mentioned that it has significantly reduced, bit more, well, not reduced, but kind of that is down to the reporting of more reporting coming through. So that's down to the work of your engagement, I assume, with like businesses and the retail. Just want to know, like, where is, since our last meeting back in October, where are we now to reducing the figures that are coming through the reporting from those businesses in retail? Are we starting to see a reduction, or is it still on the increase because we are getting more businesses reporting?
We're definitely seeing a reduction. So the overall recording of retail crime peaked in August, and then we've seen quite a marked decrease through to October, a slight rise again in the month of October, then a significant decrease again thereafter. So we ended the year not really that far away from where we ended the year in 22. It was, I think the problem came in the early part of the summer in June, where we started to see a really rapid increase in the reporting of retail crime in particular. I think that is clearly linked to the ongoing cost of living crisis, etc. I think some of the decreases that we've seen since is probably a result of the ongoing or the increased resources we put into the city centre. So albeit we had a retail crime, a sort of skeleton retail crime team at the beginning of last year, where we were looking to try and help businesses report crime to us a lot easier, share CCTV and other electronic evidence with us a lot easier through a dedicated portal and things like that. It's when we've put additional staffing in, I think, into the city centre through the central neighbourhoods team that we've seen that ability to really get out and proactively tackle some of the offenders. We were seeing offenders who were maybe wanted for 10, 12, 15 multiple offences, all relating to shop thefts, quite often from one individual retailer. We're not seeing that level of people coming to our attention anymore. What we are starting to see now is people who go to prison for these offences don't go to prison for very long. So they go for maybe a matter of weeks, if not at best months. And then we are heavily reliant and then on the wider partnership work, as Tom explained, through the IOM process with that flex cohort to try and stop that reoffending. That's one key element to it. But then equally working with the businesses to make sure that they've got designing out crime opportunities in the stores, that we're supporting them in terms of CCTV, etc., things like that. So I think when you take that rounded picture, yes, we really peaked in the summer, but we do seem to have recovered it back to a reasonable level and not that far away from where we were at the end of 22 and compared to 23. I think when you look at the overall percentages, we are much closer now to the force average in the last 3 months. So the force average for retail crime is around 45%. We are now measured at 47%. So that's an increase of 45% and an increase of 47%. So at the peak of last year, we saw an increase of 52% compared to a 46% increase force-wide. So I think we've got some confidence there that we've narrowed that gap. I think some of the causation behind it is, if I'm honest, beyond our control. We can do our best when we talk about that wider provision with partnership engagement, but as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, I think that is one of the key drivers behind what we see being stolen from shops is very basic, common commodity. It's not necessarily high-end value products or anything like that. We have run a number of different policing operations at some of our most hotspot areas, and that's something we'll continue to do, where we've had plainclothes officers in store, waiting essentially for someone to come and commit a crime and then finding those people and process them really quickly. That's gained some traction, certainly in some of our most prolific hotspot areas. The Force ran a symposium just before Christmas where we pulled in retail crime leads nationally with some key national representation from people like from One Stop and other big retailers, and that ongoing work to sort of understand what else we can do to support each other in that, tackling that. You'll see recently in the media, even this week, where people are pushing for legislation around offences committed against shop workers. So it's all that wider picture that we need to really look at too now. I think we can't escape the other wider work as well, so not losing sight of some of the work that we've done to tackle drug dealing activity in the city centre to try and cut some of that drug-dependent crime as well. I think that's probably contributed to seeing some of those reductions that we've seen in the sort of latter half of last year. So it's that ongoing battle, really, to try and keep on top of it as best we can. It does take some resources at the same time, but then reliant on those wider sort of flex processes that Tom's discussed as well.
Yes, go on. Go on.
In terms of the percentages across the force, we've stubbornly remained around 26-27%. So that would suggest Sheffield, with a population of 600,000, around 13% more recorded crime, even though the population is double. And then the figures will suggest that Barnsley and Rotherham are around 17%. So that would suggest that there's probably more recorded crime per population in Doncaster than elsewhere in South Yorkshire.
There is, yeah. I think when you look at some of those key indicators, we talk about burglary, we've had some really positive success in burglary, but 4 of the 5 key burglary hotspot areas in the force still are in Doncaster. So when we talk about rates of crime per head of population, there is some significant challenges still within Doncaster in terms of that fight against crime. So you're right in what you say.
So are the resources, and are we confident we could change that figure so we're more in line in terms of population?
That's certainly our commitment. It's an ongoing battle. It's that what we are reliant on that wider partnership working there to support us in that effort. We have a really strong partnership locally within Doncaster, but yeah, it would be nice to see us become a more proportionate representative crime rate per head of population to the districts. Absolutely.
Pete, just on back of Gemma's question with business robberies, is that 107 cases throughout the year?
The 107, yeah, sorry. So I think, let me just check what we said in the presentation. That will be the year count of 2023, if that's what is the number.
Yeah, it is there.
Yeah.
Between that period, January 23, December 23.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I kind of find that. I think there's a lot of underreporting there because I work in retail, and the myth going round now is if it's not over £200, the police don't turn up. I work in Aldi, and we get three or four a day shoplifting coming from meat, cheese, coffee, and it mounts up. And we had an assault last week on a member of staff, which it's not been dealt with yet, which obviously turns into robbery. But I find that small to what I see and hear out there in the public. I think there's little underreporting, because I know Aldi alone, if it's just a little bit, they don't pick up the phone. When it's big, then they will.
And that may well be like company policy of Aldi. Certainly if someone reports an offence to us, we'll investigate it. There is no set limit on value before we become interested in investigating a crime. That might relate to sentencing, is the real values placed on the value of property stolen might affect sentencing, but certainly the reporting of, no, that's not something we have in place. There may well be some underreporting. I think that's one of the reasons why we held the wider sort of works conference with wider retailers last year, to try and understand how we can improve that reporting to us. Certainly some of the things we've done locally to improve the reporting is making the availability to provide evidence to us much easier. So we can directly share CCT, for example, now through a portal, instead of having to come to the shop and download it, to try and speed up that process of gathering the evidence that we need. But there's nothing from our point of view in terms of a restriction on the reporting. We maybe need some more with the retailers to encourage that reporting, but that's a challenge when you've got big multinational companies like Aldi, for example. It's their appetite to engage, I suppose, in that process.
If I may, Chair, could I just to add to what Pete said about, you're quite right, Debbie, there is a lot of issues around underreporting. And certainly my experience in the city centre, when I first started, we found that across the board. We were aware of incidents of shoplifting that weren't being reported. So we developed a retail crime plan in conjunction with the police. And part of that is about encouraging businesses to report. So we now know, and we know this from feedback from businesses and certainly around the Frenchgate Centre, that there's now a real appetite to report offences, because if the reports are made, we know who the individuals are. It's the same people that's actually affected a number of premises. So if we get the reports in, we get the evidence, we can get people arrested and processed accordingly. And one interesting story that I experienced personally was where the police had actually proactively found somebody in possession of stolen property, gone back to the well-known retailer, and actually that retailer said, we don't want to prosecute because our policy is. So we've got a prisoner, we've got somebody sat in cells, and they were unable to prosecute because the store wouldn't process it. So I actually wrote to the retailer and said, can you re-look at this policy, please? Because we are trying to take a different approach in Doncaster. We're trying to be more proactive. The police have put extra resources in to support our plans. Can you please raise with your management to review the policy? So there's an example there of it works both ways, actually. You know, we want to, support staff, support people, and some of these offenders know what the prosecution limits are. And in those cases, they're actually targeting premises of that value of goods. So we're trying to get around these things and, work together. And the retail crime work in the city centre in particular, again, there's a great partnership effort there. It's not just the police. It's not just a problem for the police. It's a problem for ourselves as well. So we have regular meetings to share information, share intelligence. We know that when certain individuals are wanted by the police, our team may spot them in the city centre. That could be a city centre engagement officer, could be CCTV. We can actually pass that information on to the police and they can then go out and make some arrests. It works really, really well. And I think it's a great example of a success story, and it's pleasing to see that those figures are starting to come down now. And I think realistically come down as well, because actually we're targeting the right people. But obviously there are some people out there that are really badly affected by the cost of living crisis, and we know that, in terms of dealing with people from that extent, there is a lot of, empathy in terms of people that are first-time entrants or whatever. There's a real process for managing that in a supportive way, rather than just going down the prosecution route as well. And that's particularly the case with young people, whereby, they may be, involved in shoplifting for the first time. We want to stop them reoffending. So some of the work around the youth offending team is about stopping young people getting into the criminal justice system. So we do a lot of work around that as well.
Thanks. Thanks for your presentation. Absolutely bang on. It's just regarding the same as David said. I mean, we were on Goodson Boulevard 2 days ago, and the co-op on there. It seems that they have a policy not to report, and that is obviously unhelpful when we're trying to get residents to report any crime, because we know that those statistics need to be given in to show that there's a problem. And when speaking to some staff in there that we know, they're telling us, oh, there's so-and-so from down there, there's so-and-so from down there, they came in, they did that, they took that. And same as you said, they're prolific. It's the same people that are doing it over and over again, and the staff know they are. But when the staff live locally, they're frightened because they don't want to report, because they live close to them and know they are. So, I mean, I just find it unhelpful that the shops aren't reporting in, and there must be a way in for them somewhere.
And I think that's what we need to keep working on. That's one reason why we try to pull together, you know, the larger retailers to a meeting that we held in Sheffield just before Christmas, to try and understand how we can continue to work with them to encourage that reporting. Because, like you say, the detrimental effect it has when you live locally, you know these people locally, they're in your own community. I can understand the hesitancy of not wanting to report that crime. But that is then incumbent on the retailer as an employer to maybe support them better. In having that confidence to do that, because certainly I think what we can show from our locally is when we've had the reports made to us, we've been very effective at catching those people. The way we now monitor the uptake of arrest around those key offenders is done daily. So, like I say, we are seeing as many people committing multiple offences before we get hold of them. They may be committing 3 or 4, still 3 or 4 too many, but they're not committing. We're not looking for someone for 20 jobs anymore. We're looking for people with 3 or 4 jobs, which is, I suppose, me locally, a measure that I take some confidence in, that when people do report it, we are relatively effective at catching them fairly promptly.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next section of questions. I think that's from you, Deb.
Thank you, Chair. Referring to paragraph 13, could you expand on the rights of way after retail hours where this will run, please?
Yeah, I think there's 2 parts to this question. One is about the rights of way, and one's about police operating from the French Gate Centre. But I'll cover the first part, if I may. So this is linked to some of the issues of experience with the antisocial behaviour, the youth-related ASB in the French Gate Centre. As part of the work that we've had working with Corinne Mycock, who's the new manager of the French Gate Centre, we've actually had a tour of the French Gate Centre, which is the front-facing public part, and also the workings behind the scenes. And it is an absolute rabbit warren, I can assure you. It's very, very large space, lots of stairwells, lift areas, etc. And what the French Gate have found is, from a security perspective, it's really difficult for them to cover all these areas. So on an evening in particular, what they're looking at doing after the closure of businesses is the ones that aren't a public right-of-way, and it's particularly the areas between Taco Bell and Next, which people will be familiar with on the upper floor, and also Debenhams, that area there. On a night time, when that's open, they've got a really big area to cover. And off there are a number of stairwells that link down to the car park and the interchange. So what the French Gate Centre are looking at the moment is looking at whether they can zone that off, so it's easier for them to manage it on an evening in particular when the retail premises have closed. So we've still got the access from the railway station, we've still got the access to the bus station for people in the car park, and the issue is it's a 24-hour car park. So it's balancing those needs, but I think a great example where we've talked about youth-related ASB, we've talked about what we can do from a partnership perspective, but what we've done is actually turned it round on the French Gate and said, well, what can you do, you know, in terms of the big area you've got to cover, in terms of more focus for the security staff who look after the building on a night time. So it's part of our plan to tackle ASB, not just about, you know, the actual enforcement side of things and the engagement, but some of it's about some of the place-based issues, which I think, and that business, which is great, that Corinne and her team at the French Gate Centre are actually prepared to take that on. So she's going to her senior management and speaking to them about what can we do, you know, in terms of helping with this issue. So it's been a very enlightening experience, really. And I'll let Pete answer the part around police operating from the French Gate Centre.
Yeah, it won't just operating. Rumour is you're having like a station in there.
That's one rumour that's probably true then. It won't be a station, but there'll be a satellite office for officers to use in duty time. So it's been identified, the space has been identified, which is working through a process of getting the IT sorted and getting the security access sorted. And then there will be essentially a touchdown base for officers and PCSOs to use in their duty time within the French Gate. So we've got that sort of clearer visibility, because I think we do recognise you see those key crunch points that certainly in school holidays, etc., where we do seem to have those problems. So hopefully that will go somewhere to address that. So we're really grateful, actually, certainly with the new management that's come in at the French Gate. And I know someone's asked about our working relationship with the new managers at the French Gate is really strong. And we're really grateful to have that space sort of afforded to us. So we should see, hopefully, in the next few months, that visibility much easier to maintain, because we'll have some semi-permanent presence there.
I've got additional question that's just popped through, engaging like residents and businesses this week around the city centre. I hope you don't mind me asking additional. It relates a little bit to what was just mentioned about a little bit of retail crime, in the sense like the attacks towards like staff. Now this is around the hospitality. I'm aware there's been a couple of incidents in the city centre around those where they've struggled and contacted partners such as the police as well about those with extreme mental health and containment and support around that. I am aware like kind of mental health is not always engaged with police, but I know there has been like where they have attacked staff and then they've been taken by police and then come back into the city centre, and it's been a struggle to manage regards to the hospitality businesses. I was just wondering what's being done to support those businesses, and how are we working as a partner along as council to support those with extreme mental health as well.
I'm not aware of the actual specific examples that you've given. I think when we look broadly at what we're trying to do in the nighttime economy piece, where we're running or hosting events with licensees and other people who are involved in nighttime economy licenses, whether it's from taxi drivers through to takeaway owners, etc. One of the things that we've been doing is running Op Sentinel, which is a plainclothes policing operation in the city centre that tries to identify people within vulnerability. So it might be someone who has mental health problems, it might be someone who is vulnerable through drink or drugs, etc., trying to give them the right help and support so that they don't fall victim to crime. We've had to engage heavily with partners within the nighttime economy to get the operation running successfully. So that might be something that supports that vicariously. I think when we look at what we are now operating as an organisation in terms of our approach called Right Care, Right Person, then that's trying to ensure that colleagues from other services are able to best support people in mental health crisis. It's not necessarily the police are the best agency to deal with that. So although we can go and remove them, we are very, very dependent on other agencies in terms of that wider support or treatment that might take place with that individual. So it's really hard for me to sort of give an answer to your question, if I'm honest, about that, because that's not something within our gift or control. I suppose from our point of view, it's making sure that we've got visibility and presence in the city centre. We've got that ongoing engagement and relationship with businesses and other partners, whether it's people from Bill's team or elsewhere, to ensure that we've got that good communication, good understanding of who the individuals are, and that we continue to support them and, in a way, care for them as well, given their particular vulnerabilities and needs, but then are very reliant on other partners wider in terms of mental health provision, for example, in terms of what then happens to them.
I think it's a bit of concern as well. It is like out of hours as well. So who else is that contact? Maybe it's a discussion outside of this committee with yourselves and maybe partners to discuss this in a bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Going on to next section. I think that's from you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you for that about mental health as well. I mean, having children that have suffered nastily with mental health, we know how hard it is and who needs to be engaged. And I think some of it, just off the back of what you've said, Chair, is that there's when police get involved, the person ends up being sectioned. And as a parent, you don't want that child sectioned because you want to care for that child. And it needs to be delicately held. But thank you very much. Street drinking. The report shows where plans have been implemented. Are there any areas of concern, and why was there the need to introduce street drinking plans?
If I may, I'll take that one. The area that we're talking about in terms of the street drinking plan was predominantly in the Conisbrough area. It was an issue that was raised by local businesses and ward members, and it was a small cohort of individuals that had a drink problem, a problem with drink, problem with alcohol. So our initial approach was around, the engagement services that we talked about earlier. What can we do to help and assist? The problem continued and persisted, still caused issues for local businesses. So as a result of that, there was more of an enforcement approach using community protection warning letters and then a notice which basically resolved the issue and meant that those individuals were on the understanding that if you actually are at this location and drink and behave antisocially, because that's the key thing, it's the noise, it's the nuisance, it's everything that comes with it, the litter, etc. And that was dealt with in that way. In terms of other areas of Doncaster, in terms of street drinking, it seems to be one of those issues that that moves around sometimes, and the really thing that we rely upon is that local intelligence. So it could be the local community, businesses reporting a key location. And I think the great example from Conisbrough is that now we've got something that actually works. It's a stepped up approach and it's worked. We can actually move that to other areas. And it's something that, again, you know, there's pockets in the city centre that we're aware of. So again, you know, if we become aware of a location, we look at it from a perspective of the partnership. What can we do together to tackle this issue? What's the underlying causes? And let's look at, you know, the intervention prevention first before we go down the enforcement route. So it's a great question. And actually, I think, you know, by the example we've used with Conisbrough in particular, that's a model I think that we can use elsewhere in Doncaster where the problem comes to prominence.
I think we've all seen issues with street drinking and lights in centre, and that's been going on for some time now, hasn't it? I mean, we know that extra funding we're out there to try and help the people, but I mean, I drove a taxi around, as you know, for 12 years, and there's people that you see now are the people that you saw then, the same people. I mean, the guy with coat on, I think he's not a drinker, he's got his own issues, but how are we engaging with those people that have been there for some time? I mean, I can come round. I know that everybody's offered somewhere to live. It's up to them whether they engage or not. And I can come from dropping my son off at work first thing in the morning and drive through town. There's people sleeping in the same places every day. I mean, it's great that you're focusing on places that you know where the issues are. But what kind of engagement are you getting from these people that are in the same place every day?
So in the city centre and across the borough, we've got the Complex Lives team, and the Complex Lives team are a borough-wide service. So, for example, if we get someone that appears in, you know, a small community on the outskirts of Doncaster, we've got the ability for the local area team to flag that up as an issue, and then we can get some engagement for the Complex Lives team. What's important about that for me is it's the people with the right skills and approach to be able to support these individuals. So it could well be that there's a very complexity of issues in their life that we need to support and address. It could be mental health, it could be drinking, it could be substance misuse, it could be a combination of all three. So that's what we rely upon. And you're right, there are some people that, you know, have been around for a very, very long time. I can assure you that there's a massive amount of engagement that goes off with these individuals, and you know there's a lot of support in place to get them into accommodation, and then they're in accommodation for a short time, and then for various reasons they either get evicted or they leave and return to, you know, sleeping rough, etc. So it's a continual cycle. The main thing we say all the time is we don't give up. We don't give up on anybody. And at the end of the day, even though it might have been going on for a number of years, and I know recently, a few weeks ago, there was one individual who's been quite problematic for a number of years. We've managed to get them into accommodation for the first time in about 5 years. And it's an amazing result. And when you're at the meeting and you listen to the team talking about it, everybody's really celebrating that success story. But then the pressure is keeping them there and keeping them stable. But, you know, they're a fantastic team. We all work together really closely. I know linking with Public Health Services and Aspire and all the other partners as well. It's not just Complex Lives. There's a whole network of people out there. But what we need to do is some of the outlying areas where that becomes an issue, we can actually put those services in place and make sure that that engagement is there for them. It's a really important point.
Okay, so next section, questions we've got from Debbie.
Yes, thank you, Gemma. The NRT does not operate on bank holidays, and there can be many residential issues from noise and parties creating community tensions. The NRT would normally respond to these incidents. Is this something South Yorkshire Police could support NRT's absence?
It's very much dependent on the nature of the call. So if there's we obviously, every call to service that we have, people can report noise and antisocial behaviour like that, what you're describing to us. Where the NRT are not available, certainly on a bank holiday, for example, we would be looking at an assessment around the threat, harm and risk in relation to that report to us. Is a likelihood of escalation? What does that look like in terms of known community tension in the area? So just because the NRT aren't on, and that is a problem, that still could be reported to us, and that still may well elicit a response from us. But as part of that assessment in terms of the wider context of what's been reported. So we wouldn't necessarily have dedicated function to on the periphery of the NRT for a bank holiday, for example, but that's not to say that reports can't still be made to us. We'd assess it like we would anything else and potentially attend. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Yeah.
May I add to that, Chair, as well? Because I actually manage the NRT. So the NRT was set up in 2006, way before I started with the council. And since that time, it's not worked on a bank holiday. And that's down to budget pressures in relation to providing that service. We've been in discussions with Councillor Cobby recently about exactly the same issue. And what we are doing for the next bank holiday period is we're going to monitor the number of calls that actually come in that potentially we could have sent the NRT to if they were working. And based upon that analysis, we are going to look at that in terms of, is there a business case that allows us to put the NRT on a bank holiday? There will be some challenges to it. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we will look at those figures and data and review it. And as Pete says, even though that the NRT may not be working, there is a strong mechanism in place to deal with any of those calls. So, for example, our out-of-hours service is still working. So if people ring and report a minor issue in relation to noise nuisance, the team downstairs, the out-of-hours team, which I also manage, they will take the details. And if it's something that seems major, we need to get somebody there, they'll liaise with police colleagues about it. If it's something that can wait until the working day starts again, they will take details and pass that on to the appropriate team to deal with and do some follow-up as well. So it's not an ignored call at all. If it comes to the council out of hours, we will manage it. And if it is something that, for example, it's escalating, we will contact the police. And as Pete's explained, they've got a mechanism for managing those calls as well. But it is something we're looking at as well.
Debbie, I think you've got the next question.
Me again. Could an update be provided with regards to addressing the nuisance caused by off-road, quad and battery-powered bikes? And is any cross-boundary work being undertaken, e.g. like when they're coming from West Yorkshire to South Yorkshire?
Yeah. I think there's some key challenges we're trying to tackle, the persistent use of off-road bikes, etc., in that setting. And I think we think of it in three key sort of areas. We think about catching them while they're doing it. That's really difficult because of our resourcing and the time of day, that and potentially finding them there, we have to be in the right area at the right time. So that is a real challenge. We obviously rely on the off-road bikes team a lot, and they are persistently in the hotspot areas regularly, patrolling. We try to coordinate that working with them. We do run operations called Operation STARS, which is the cross-border initiative. So we've ran a number of those in the borough in the last year, where we're trying to work with colleagues from either West Yorkshire or Humberside in particular to try and do some joined-up work that looks at tackling off-road bikes, particularly being used in criminality around rural crime types. So that's something that is continuing. In May, there will be some intensified policing activity as part of our Operation Duxford programme that is going to be deliberately targeting off-road bikes. I can talk to you separately about that and give you a bit more of a detailed briefing around that. I don't want to sort of show our hand too much in this meeting. So there is an ongoing issues around that. The wider points, I guess, it's looking at what other target hardening opportunities that we have. So we do a lot of work with partners locally at those key locations around fencing, barriers, etc. We've talked about this a lot before in the council, the challenges that we have in terms of maintaining access rights and disability wheelchair access as well. That's a real problem. When we look at some of our key areas, there's so many multiple entry points into those points where people are riding the bikes. That remains a challenge for us, but we are doing other work with forecourt. So we have Forecourt Watch, which is trying to prevent people selling fuel to people using the bikes to start with, and we've got a number of garages locally who've engaged with that. And we're also doing something called Storage Yard Watch, again trying to engage with people who run storage facilities to prevent them allowing the storage of off-road bikes, quads, electric bikes, etc. at their facilities. So it's about trying to make it as hard as possible for people to own one and then use one effectively. And the other main strand is around that investigation. So we review every single report that's made to us. We try to identify those lines of inquiry where we can ID a rider or the address where they've taken that bike back to. And then trying to make those slow time inquiries around whether it's enforcement in conjunction with the wider partners around that address, etc. So that's, I think, in terms of catching them at it, the bit around target hardening those investigation points are some of our key pieces of work that we're doing locally. The force is currently reviewing its policy around off-road bikes and how we deal with them, how we try to tackle them. It's fraught with challenges for us in terms of trying to pursue somebody on an off-road bike, in terms of the safety of not just the public but our officers as well, and the rider as well. They're quite often not wearing, as you know, helmets, etc. So it's a really difficult problem to tackle, partly because of the safety implications around it as well. But I think with what we're doing in terms of that preventative space, working with garages, storage facilities, with the support of the specialist team as well, thinking then about how we can work with wider partners around further enforcement activity, I think that's how we're going to crack it. But it's going to take us a while to get through it, and hopefully once we get through this phase in May, which we're in the planning stages at the minute, we'll have some good news to talk about. It's then building on that as we move forward and continuing with those wider cross-boundary operations as well.
Just one thing to add to what Pete said there, if I may. Pete doesn't know this yet, but we are actually going to pull together a members' seminar in relation to antisocial behaviour. So that's an opportunity for us to come along and talk about in more detail about some of the things we're doing to tackle ASB. And I am absolutely sure at this point, one of the main features will be off-road bikes and quad bikes. So we're hoping that potentially we can get James Shirley, who's the sergeant of the off-road bike team, who some of you may have met, really inspirational character, and hopefully James will be able to come along and talk in more detail about some of the tactics that Pete spoke about and the challenges that we face as well. So hopefully that will be a good opportunity for members to learn a little bit more.
I'm going to leave question 6, Chair, because we've already clarified that. Is that okay? And 7, Skylarks Estate. This is to complement. I kept getting so many messages from Skylark residents. They have a WhatsApp page, things that was going off. So I was having a meeting with partners where we could resolve this and, relieve pressure for residents. So I invited one member of the estate. I said, it's not a public meeting, but you can come along and speak on behalf of everybody else. And from that meeting with the police, St. Ledger, Keep Moat, Stronger Families, some information was given there, and then the police went away, did a lot of work, and within 2 days, all went quiet. They actually nailed down on it, and we had an update from the residents, and everything's been absolutely spot on, so well done. That's it. I'd like to say thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to the next question, which is from Councillor James Church.
Sadly, the 9% increase in rape, that's a standout figure in the report. Would you be able to give us some context on that in terms of what is it a 9% increase on? Is there any particular areas where we may well have concerns about? Where is it happening in the city centre, or is it across the city as a concern? Could you give us context, please?
I think I'll first of all say we're talking still about relatively small numbers. So when we look at the increases we reported 342 rapes in 2022, and we reported 367 rapes in 2023. So that accounts for that 8 or 9% increase. We've done a lot of work, as some of the points that Karen talked about in that subgroup, but wider as well within South Yorkshire, trying to encourage and improve people's confidence in reporting rape to us. So we've run the No More campaign, which you may well have seen locally, which is designed to feel people empowered that they can report offending to us. I've tried to dig into the detail of why we've seen that 9% increase, and there's nothing standing out in terms of a particular area where we've seen that problematic, that come into a problem. We've seen within the presentation already that we've seen a decrease in some of the reporting of sexual offending in a domestic situation, which is positive. We regularly review on a fortnightly basis any trending around sexual offending. in the last year, we've had no concerns about serial offending or anything of that nature. The rapes that are reported to us tend to be standalone. They're quite often historic in nature as well. So the 367 that have been reported to us in 2023 wouldn't have all occurred in 2023. Quite a significant proportion of those offences are at least a year old, some even more than that. It's not unusual for people to report offending to us that's maybe 20, 30 years old. So there is quite a lot of context to the figures, which is probably the best account I can give you really to explain why we've seen that increase. We've not seen a sudden run in one particular area or one particular cohort of victim or anything like that that can allow us to pick up a sort of target activity. It's more broadly around the improvement that we've seen around domestic abuse in particular is a big step for us because we see a lot of sexual violence within that setting. And then as we continue to work through our plans around making the nighttime economy safer, that wider work from the Safer Streets, for example, in terms of that, the open space work and things like that is all going towards making those improvements. But it's really difficult to take a measure because of the nature of how we record it. Like I say, a big proportion of offences will be historic. So it's what I'll try to do is I'll come back with, I'll speak to you separately with some more maybe broken down data that sort of reflects what's actually happened in 2023 and see what that looks like and report back to you if that's all right. Okay.
Thank you. I think you've got another question, James.
Yeah, with paragraph 20, again, it's about the context of it, and I know you'll probably not be able to speak about it in too much depth in terms of investigation and stuff like that, but it does stand out. Again, you've got 170 nominals, 11 mapped out organised groups, and you know there's more. It kind of stands out. It would just, if you could give me a little bit more context in terms of how confident we are in terms of we know they're there and dealing with these people too.
Yeah, absolutely fine, and I can totally understand why the question's asked as well. The context of serious and organised crime. I actually chair the Serious and Organised Crime Theme Group, which is a group of partners which involves the police, it involves a lot of partnerships across Doncaster City Council and also some outside agencies. Those mapped organised crime groups, I can assure you they get the most detailed attention in terms of their activities. I think in the public domain is the fact that organised crime has tentacles that stretch into every walk of life in society, and they will exploit any kind of weaknesses, whether that be financial crime, whether that be modern slavery, human trafficking, whether that be land development, whether that be waste management, and the subjects go on and on and on. The major one is drugs, obviously, we know that, and drugs has an impact on all our communities. So some of those mapped organised crime groups, some will specialise in particular areas, some will specialise in particular types of crime. And what we do is we've got an overview of all their activity. We meet on a regular basis at a tactical level to discuss, for example, what we can bring to the show from a council perspective. So what are our tools and powers in relation to this location, in relation to this individual. Very often we can only talk about it after the event, so we can talk about the results of operations, but what we don't do is talk about some of the tactics that's involved. We've got a very close information sharing agreement, so we can share information legitimately, lawfully, in relation to activities. And one of the things we've spoken about earlier, off-road bikes and quad bikes, we know there's a link between the use of those bikes and some criminal activity as well. And that also applies to some acquisitive crimes as well, where we're getting fuel thefts in lay-bys, etc., etc. So the fact I've not included it is not me trying to hold anything back from you. It's just the fact that, you know, it's a very sensitive area. It's done for a reason, because we need to make sure that that intelligence and information is kept very tight. We need to protect the sources of that information as well, because people that come forward with that kind of information, they're obviously very fearful about repercussions. And I know that it's something that, you know, we protect very much so in terms of where that information intelligence comes from. The important thing is we rely upon communities, we rely upon elected members, we rely upon partners to actually come forward with that information, and using that network and structure that we've got in relation to the investigation of organised crime, we put that jigsaw together, and that picture that's developed tells us where we need to focus our resources. I think Tom and Pete and everybody involved in the agenda would love more resources, but actually working close with the team, I can give you that strong reassurance that actually, you know, there is a lot of focused activity. And I don't know if, Tom, if you've got a couple of examples of some of the operations that you've run recently, if you want to go through that, and that will probably talk about some of the results and the kind of work that goes into them.
Yeah, so as you said in your question, you understand that we can't share everything. I think that is one of the challenges. I'm comfortable with sharing the broad sort of layout of South Yorkshire Police or Doncaster in terms of how we manage organised crime. So there is a dedicated team within Doncaster called the Proactive Team, whose daily business is organised crime, and they have the responsibility for managing the organised crime groups within Doncaster, and they are the experts in doing that. They are supported by the 4 neighbourhood teams, so they're obviously mapped out against the localities. So you've almost got that 2-tiered response. So you've got the proactive team and the neighbourhood team all seeking to manage organised crime at different levels. We are supported by force resources, so when we've got a particular issue, we can request, so if it's based around vehicle crime, we can request traffic resources, for example. So the force is able to provide additional support as and when it's required. So the 11 organised crime groups that we currently have, in terms of understanding the risk, they are scored. I can't go into the detail of it, but there is an independent process that looks at all the available information and tracks their score over time. We have seen a sustained reduction over the last 18 months in Doncaster's collective risk score. So we know as the police and partners what our sort of risk is. So it's not just sort of, oh, we'll draw a circle around them and draw a circle around them. It's quite a managed process run by analysts, so not by police officers. So there is a structure to it in Doncaster, which has been quite effective. There is the bronze meeting with all the partners that the police and Bill co-chairs, brings everybody who can offer anything to the table. So it isn't just the police or safety managing that, because you need that sort of whole Doncaster approach. What I can share is some of the stuff that we have done. There is obviously work ongoing, as you'd expect. I can't share that. But some of the recent sort of things that I'd want to pick out. So at the end of 2022 into early 2023, we ran an operation called Train Alpha, which was targeting predominantly around drug dealing out of houses. In a 4-month period, we executed 51 warrants. Loads and loads of drugs recovered, 67 people arrested. Key in there is 6, and it was actually more by the end of it, but 6 firearms recovered. So that's an example of some of the proactive work that we are doing. That was earlier last year. We've just had another operation that we're just in the sort of we're sweeping up at the moment, but that's seen 100 people arrested, really for street drug dealing. So some of those cases are going through the courts at the moment, but so far 21 of those people have been jailed for a total of 57 years for dealing Class A drugs on streets of Doncaster, predominantly in the town centre, where we know it's a real challenge. So all that work is ongoing in the background. A couple of other bits that I'd like to pick out. So unfortunately, we had a serious incident in the north of county where there was a dispute about drugs, and an OCG attacked some young people. 4 people sentenced for 53 years in total for that, all mapped OCG members. Enormous piece of work because we didn't know who they were to begin with, so it wasn't an easy case to prosecute, but ultimately that's just concluded in the last week or so with sentencing. I'm really pleased with that. That has a really significant impact on that organised crime group. And just some of our other activities. So there is a group that we'll know about in Denby called the PSB. A prolific member of that group has just been sentenced for 7 years for possession of a firearm. So there are some really positive results that I can share with you, but that's the sort of activity that's been generated by our proactive teams and our neighbourhood teams on a daily basis. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's a bit more assuring now. Now you've explained it as well as you possibly could, I think, Bill. So thank you for that. And I have followed some of the convictions that have occurred. You seem to be doing that quite well through the media as well, even the minor ones as well. That's welcome as well.
To the next section, I think that's with you, Steve, on reducing violence and violent crime.
I think that feeds in nicely to this question. CCTV, number of cameras, and what evidence is collated from them. And I think you know, Bill, that we've tried to, within our ward, put CCTV in as a proactive thing. So if there's a crime that happens as somebody's travelled through, there's a potential for evidence to be gained, and that's part of the reason why we want to do it. And I'm just wondering what evidence is collated from them, and do the police know where these cameras are to try and gain that information?
Yeah, in terms of CCTV, we have an extensive network across Doncaster, which I'm pleased to say. And when we compare that with other areas of South Yorkshire, for me, it is absolutely stand out in terms of the network of cameras that we've got. A lot of the cameras are monitored from this civic office, so we've got the monitoring suite downstairs as well, which the police have got access to. They work alongside us. We work together. There's a very strong relationship between the two. In terms of public realm CCTV, which is the type that we deal with, we have a whole variety of evidence that's captured on there. Some examples that spring to mind are fly tipping incidents where we've placed cameras in particular communities, and you wouldn't believe it, but blatantly people will dump rubbish in front of a camera. That information is passed on to our enforcement team, and we've had a lot of results in relation to successful prosecutions for that. In terms of where we've got issues in particular challenging communities, you know, and some of that is related to our previous conversation about organised crime. We know where those challenging communities are, and again, we look at placing cameras in those locations. It is a challenge to put those cameras in, and we're looking at all sorts of different methods and tactics to try and make sure that they're placed and they're placed safely without being attacked. And I know councillors in the room today know what those challenges are, because we live and breathe them every day. But in terms of other incidents as well, there may well be some very serious incidents, and I can think over the last few years when I've been at the council, there's been some very serious incidents whereby CCTV, which we've captured, has been crucial to that police investigation and prosecution, and that ranges from serious assaults right up to, you know, homicides, etc. And indeed, we're contacted sometimes by other forces because we've got people that are travelling through Doncaster, and that CCTV evidence may be crucial. Again, it's all shared appropriately. It's all shared according to the guidelines, the government guidelines as well. And, you know, every day we seem to be using CCTV in different ways. The one thing I do say is that CCTV is not the panacea and answer to everything. However, it does help, you know, and I know it provides reassurance to communities. I know it's a great way of gathering evidence when resources, partnership resources, police resources can't be there, but we can actually backtrack to incidents and actually recover evidence which helps to prosecute people. It helps to build up a picture of what's happening on the streets as well, and in our communities. So for me, CCTV will always remain an important tactic in terms of dealing with antisocial behaviour, dealing with crime, and providing reassurance to communities. So for me, you know, the challenges around funding, if I'm honest, we look at opportunities everywhere we can to get funding. And the team that I work with, we look at everything that's out there. You know, the ones that we've seized upon traditionally and done really, really well is the Safer Streets running from the Home Office. And we're now on to round 5 of Safer Streets. In every single round, CCTV is featured. So we are out there campaigning on your behalf to try and get additional cameras. And one thing we've tried to do, particularly with Safer Streets round 4, is some of those communities that traditionally don't have a camera system, Armthorpe being one, Bawtry, Woodlands, Highfields, you know, we're actually looking at where can we put these systems, you know, that don't have any CCTV at the moment. As I say, they're not the answer to everything, so it might well be that some of the smaller communities have only got 1 or 2 cameras, but actually it does help and it provides that reassurance. And if there are any incidents at all, we can obviously recover CCTV and it might support investigations or ongoing partnership work to try and problem solve some of the issues in these communities. But as I say, it's not the panacea to everything. It's not the magic bullet that's going to solve everything, but it does help when it's actually working alongside other resources like boots on the ground and other successful tactics around enforcement. So hopefully that answers that question.
It does part of it, Bill. I mean, you know, the process that we've gone through within the ward has been long, and it's been very difficult, and we haven't received funding until this last round of Safe Streets, and thank you for that, because one of the things that we've been highlighting is the disparity between different sections of our ward, bearing in mind the Cantley and the cross-boundary stuff. But what we were trying to do, again, is to be proactive, to try, because we know that where criminality is going to happen is if there's nothing there to prevent it. We know that we haven't got boots on ground in villages. We know that they're not there and will respond once called. But in finding that funding, we've had to go out all over the place to try and find that funding. But we're getting there, and we're getting there. It'd just be nice if sometimes, and this is not a goal, Bill, if we could work together, because I mean, some signage that we want to put up, there's different issues that are going off there, but just a bit more of a conversation would be absolutely bang on if possible.
Well, that's understood and appreciated, yeah.
Sorry, can I just add into that answer? So, from a police perspective, we really value civic CCTV, but we also really value private sources CCTV. So, where there's perhaps limited coverage from a civic point of view in certain areas, there is still quite a significant coverage from private cameras, even ring doorbells and things like that. So, from our point of view, in terms of evidence gathering, we're not necessarily that hindered sometimes by the lack of CCTV from a civic perspective in some areas. It's extremely useful and we'd always welcome more, but I think it's just relevant to point out that we do have those other sources that are equally as valuable to us.
I think there's been some discussions with St Ledger Homes in terms of best practice with ring bells and stuff like that, because sometimes people think they can just put them on, and of course you need to get permissions, and that happens sometimes with other housing providers, because I'm dealing with that now where they're having discussions, people are just putting a camera up, the people that live next door to and around them welcome it, but the housing providers have got policies that say you can't have them external things fitted to your properties and stuff like that. So, I mean, I'm not saying have a great big camera like something that you would buy from Del Boy or something, but something that's beneficial in the area and not too big or whatever. I think if we can work towards that, that's another tool towards keeping our communities safer. In terms of the suite downstairs, I know it's very sophisticated and serves the town centre really well. But what I found in the outlying areas, we've got cameras that obviously have to go back and look at coverage that happened 24 hours previous. Do we feel that resource is enough to support the outlying areas?
Is this in terms of the monitoring, James, we're talking about, and bringing the signals back to the civic office? Yeah. There's lots of technical challenges around bringing signals back into the civic office. We rely very much on 4G technology, and sometimes if there's a building or some structure in place that prevents that signal. So, I mean, we could talk about it all day, but there's a whole network of aerials and signals around Doncaster, which we use to try and bring the signal back, working with our contractors, we do that. It depends on the location. I mean, the best kind of CCTV is the one that's monitored, and we can live stream that, which is great. But where we don't have that, we obviously have to make sure that it's a camera that records. Then we have to go out and download the image when it's necessary. So we are looking wherever we can to try and bring it back. The other issue is cost, because 4G isn't free, and we have to pay for that, or somebody has to pay for it. So there's part of some of the complications, really, when we look at providing systems to people in locations. Part of the conversation is, how do you want it monitoring? And if it is a cost, it's not something we can pick up as a council in every case. So you're right. The best one is the monitored one, live streaming. We look at trying to do that if we possibly can. Otherwise, the alternative is just a camera that's fixed there, and we can download the images when it's appropriate and necessary. But in terms of resources in the camera room downstairs, we've got adequate resources down there to monitor the cameras. Yeah.
Could I just come in on? So I'm just interested in your point about the use of ring doorbells on St Ledger property. So obviously, from my point of view, it's invaluable in terms of investigation, but I think also in terms of preventing crime, having a ring doorbell on your door is really good. We've seen a real increase in the use of smart technology. I was reading something the other day that says now 11% of homes have got some sort of smart technology. We've seen real positives in terms of being able to demonstrate burglary offenders committing multiple burglaries or attempt burglaries, because you can see them on different doorbells down the street. So I will pick up a conversation with St Ledger and Bill around the policy of Ring doorbells, because I think it's an opportunity for us that I think if somebody wants to put up a Ring doorbell, it's not interfering with somebody else's privacy. I think we should be encouraging that. So I will pick that up outside of here.
Okay, thank you, Tom. That sounds good. Okay, next question. I know this was a little bit answered anyway. I asked about are there plans for Epic Hub to continue post in the date in the report which said March 2024, and I know you've confirmed that, Pete, which is great. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on top of that.
No, it's just to confirm the funding streams for Epic come through Ministry of Justice funding from the PCC and then through the SSDP exec subgroup. So there are plans for it to continue next year. I think some of the focus will shift slightly to wider areas. Previously, we've been looking around Highfields, Addick and Woodlands. We're going to be looking at Bowlby a little bit more as we move into next year, because that's where prevalence of our highest number of youth offenders seem to sit. Speaking to Andy Hood yesterday, we've got some clear plans around that. So just to give that assurance, it will continue, yeah.
Great, thank you. And then back to you, James, for your next question.
I just would like a bit more information about the ID scanners that you placed in the 5 premises and how that's led to a reduction in violence in them premises, please.
Yeah, not a problem. So they're currently situated in Coco's on Silver Street, La Barraca on Silver Street, the Tiki Bar on Lazarus Court, Manana on Lazarus Court, and the Subterranean also on Lazarus Court. Those are the 5 venues that have them within the city centre. Some of the issues that we were having prior to scanners was around we've seen violent instances where door staff were refusing entry to certain people. Wasn't always accurately able to measure the number of people in a venue because they relied on the hand clickers, which is not always fully accurate. They couldn't always monitor the ratio of males to females in those premises. There was problems with fake IDs as well being used in those premises quite a lot, and also queuing systems taking too long, leading to altercations between people queuing to get into those venues. What the scanners do is essentially, if you're a regular to Tiki Bar, for example, you don't have to have your ID every time. You actually have your fingerprint. But essentially, the premises you scan in on arrival at the venue, it deters criminality ultimately. So if you're going into that venue to deal drugs, for example, you don't want your biometrics being scanned entering into that property. So that's one of the key benefits that we've seen. But what we are trying to see is that the door staff and management now, if no one's got some ID to come in, they can turn away much easier. So it deconflicts some of those problems that they're having on the door to start with. Because actually there's a clear answer now as to why you can't come in. Well, if you haven't got any ID, you're not coming in. So it's not like down to, well, I'm falling out with a bouncer because you don't like the look of me sort of conversations. Just by that, like I said, it's a clear deterrent straight away for people who want to cause mischief or criminality in the venue, because we know who's in there at any one time. We're able to actively monitor the ratio of people in the venue as well and accurately measure the people in the venue now. So from a health and safety point of view in particular, from fire regulations, for example, it's really clear. The venues know exactly who's in their venue at any one time. We've seen a significant reduction in people trying to enter premises with fake IDs. So I think some of the numbers that have been provided to me, Tiki Bar, for example, they'd collect around 15 to 20 IDs a month that were fake. They now collect around 2. So that's clearly had a benefit in terms of people trying to get into those venues. Feedback from women's networks is that they really feel it provides them with an enhanced level of feeling safer in those venues as well. So overall, and also equally, it helps us identify people who are banned or barred from those premises from entering too. So I think when you think about what that gives us collectively, I think that's significantly probably contributed to some of the shift that we've seen, certainly in the levels of violence within the nighttime economy. It'd be nice to get more. There's 12 ID scanners across SYP, 5 of which are in Doncaster, so we see them as a real positive.
Thank you. Sounds really good.
Is that voluntary for the licensee?
Yeah. But equally, as we work towards some of those initiatives, is it the Purple Badge?
Yep.
the purple badge scheme and things like that, it'd be nice if we could start to get in that scenario where if you want your purple badge, actually, to support the licensees in terms of what they need to do with the ID scanners as we develop that initiative, that's something we need to look at.
Thank you. I think we're on to the next theme, which is reducing substance and alcohol misuse. And I think we're back to you, Steve or James.
You spoke earlier, Bill, about the success with that individual, and I've seen a couple of examples myself, and I know what a difference that can make, not just to the individual, but the community in which they live in. But how confident are we that all the services and providers are joined up? So some of the barriers that some people encounter when they've got difficulties in their life, like access to the NHS or support with housing, and maybe even the simple things that we may well take for granted, are we confident that that's progressing, and then barriers are not, there's no additional barriers for people within what we do?
Is that to us or So just looking at the questions, so there's a bit also about where the referrals have come from, and I think that was come from Councillor Cox. I'll just quickly answer that. So most of the referrals coming into Aspire are self-referral, and I've just got the data up here now. So from the last year, 22-23, the percentage of new referrals coming in was 56% from self, family and friends. 19% was from health services and social care, 19% from criminal justice. So the vast majority is through self-referral. And then when I look at Yorkshire and Humber, we are slightly below the percentage for the whole of the Yorkshire Humber, which is 62%, but we're higher for the health and social care and also the criminal justice, so it's kind of like swings and roundabouts. So, and what we do, what Aspire do is, we try and encourage people to access services on their own, because it shows a level of motivation rather than kind of being forced into treatment, because the best outcomes are when the individual wants to make those changes themselves. So I just thought I'd answer that. So support service council, you mentioned about that. So, we work closely with Complex Lives, around certainly the treatment cohort that we've been discussing really today. They come to a lot of our strategic meetings. Our strategic meetings play a large part of how we work. We have a substance misuse theme group. We have the Alcohol Alliance, which is chaired by Councillor Nigel Ball. We've got, you host a harm reduction meeting, Jane, don't you, where, and drug-related deaths as well, so we go through all that. So criminal justice, we've talked a lot about them. They are now co-located with Aspire, and the outcomes are certainly improving with that cohort. Also, Aspire have subcontracted with Riverside. So again, that prevents kind of multiple duplication of assessments, and that is working really, really well. I mentioned previously about the new building that we've invested heavily in kind of, what's the word? It's a Princess Street, isn't it?
Princess Street.
So basically it's been revamped. Revamped was the word I'm looking for. So that now is there. It's away from the core service within Aspire on Thorn Road, and that is to entice more people in, and it reduces the stigma of walking into a treatment service where everybody kind of knows what's going on in there. So we're really pleased about that. Mm-hmm. There's a bit about drug and alcohol provision at DRI that we wanted to highlight there. So we know a lot of people are going into DRI for, especially for alcohol admissions, but the hard part then is to get them linked into community treatment. So we know that we've got a drug and alcohol specialist nurse based up at DRI. She only sees 4%. There's only one of her. So basically what I've been doing over the last year is working with the Integrated Care Board to try and get an alcohol care team based within DRI. Every other area within South Yorkshire has an alcohol care team. So that is a multidisciplinary team headed by clinicians, headed by nurses and doctors on a 7-day-a-week service, 24 hours a day. We haven't got one in Doncaster. So this year, we've added £100,000 into that from the supplemental monies. The Integrated Care Board are looking how to use the existing financial envelope but in a different way to try and get more people who are actually in DRI for a drug and alcohol admission into Aspire. So yeah, so hopefully that answers your question, Councillor.
And just about the partnership working, we mentioned those groups there, but the substance abuse theme group is kind of our main one where all partners come together. So you mentioned housing as an example, St Ledger and other housing providers, and it's about making sure that the cohort that we're dealing with has as much recovery capital, as we call it, as possible. So not just into treatment and looking at a prescription, but like you've rightly mentioned, the wider partnership working that we do, and that feeds up to the SSDP theme group and also to our combating drugs partnership. So we've got those mechanisms in place.
Do you want to just say about the employment support that we've just commissioned?
Yeah, we've also got employment support, individual placement support it's called, which has been funded, which is for our Aspire clients. So it's a proper dedicated service now to be able to get these people into employment and to reduce some of those barriers around that, rather than sort of saying, well, we can help you with a CV and here's a job. It's actually dedicated work, one-to-one work with that worker to be able to try and get them into that, whether it's volunteering initially, whether it's work placements, and then on to something that hopefully is more established.
Could I just follow up on that one, please? With work placement and things like that. Obviously, we have bail hostels and things in town. There's probation, offer housing. I believe that a lot of services are offered within centre. Do you work with other partners to show that there are obviously a cohort of people that have been convicted, the MAPA people, and they are kept out of their own harm's way with looking for jobs? I mean, you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And I mean, we have seen previously in my wife's line of work that she did, where there were no communication between different people when trying to find someone employment. So you could be potentially putting someone at risk, being the criminal person being put at risk, not necessarily the public. But what we used to see quite often was she would walk through into town and she'd say, oh, he's one of mine, what's he doing here? He shouldn't be here. And they're walking around town centre. So what kind of stuff's done to support partners trying to find people employment?
So it's fairly newly established, but there's been a list of sort of like preferred employment providers as a starter, so a group with a steering group attached to look at what they can provide and make sure they've got that clear communication with the senior employment worker that's based at Aspire. We're also looking in our supplemental monies for this last year to also employ a more well-rounded employment worker, because the IPS monies are very kind of narrowed with regards to it has to be somebody that's in treatment in Aspire, in structured treatment, but we're wanting to broaden that out with a worker that can also look at those that have left treatment and also those that might not actually be ready for the structured part of the treatment, and then widening that network, and within that will be widening the steering group for employers and see where that fits for both, like you say, the employer but also the potential employee. So it's a little bit in its infancy, but I am aware of what you're saying. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I mean, in its infancy, this has been going on some time, hasn't it?
The IPS?
This issue. I mean,
I meant the IPS programme. It's newly funded.
The issue as a whole,
yes,
with bail hostels and everything, and an element of criminality being housed within the centre.
Yes.
Obviously, there's a legality that they have to be able to access a service. But it's right. I mean, it concerns me quite a lot that we hear quite often it's in its infancy, but it's been going on for a long, long time. I'm pleased you're on it, but it's just a comment, really. Thank you.
It is difficult. I mean, obviously you asked the question, but what I will say is, knowing some people that work, support workers and stuff like that, they are dealing with some of the most complex and difficult people to deal with. So it is, as Bill was saying earlier, you know, at times you think to yourself, you know, what can we do with these individuals? But the fact that you're committed to saying that we won't give up on them, that's good to hear. And obviously the people that work day in, day out with them, you know, hopefully they get the support, the resources they need, and we work together to try and get positive results going forward.
Yeah, and I apologise that programme is really narrow. It's just how the funding's come across, but that's why we're hoping to try and widen it because I appreciate narrowing something isn't for the person, is it at all? So sometimes the funding constraints do make it awkward for us. Thank you.
So can I just come back in there? So Stuart Green, the service manager of Aspire, always uses a quote that dead people don't recover. So we need to get people into treatment, get them stable, get a lot of wraparound services working with these individuals before we can even look to try and get people into work. So there's lots of work to be done before that, which, that our new service model for next year and for the next 5 years, really does encompass that.
Okay, so following on from the questions, you mentioned earlier about the model for Doncaster treatment and recovery has been revised. Just be interested to know what's changed, why was it changed, a bit of information there.
Yep. So the why, the current contract is coming to an end. So it's part of our commissioning cycle. An ideal time to look at what we've consulted with people both actively engaging in treatment and those that are not, to understand what some of the potential barriers were, as we've mentioned before, around rapid prescribing. We know that previously they've had to wait for assessments, so it's about getting those waiting times down so that they can have those full assessments, of course, to look at the wider complexities of that individual, but it's just about getting them into treatment and getting that support they need as soon as possible. We mentioned as well about the consultation for representations. Aspire have assured us that they are looking to make sure that they're addressing those recommendations, such as getting better pathways in with mental health. We appreciate it's very unusual for somebody to be linear with their problems. There is that full complexities and how we can address those working together within those services.
Yeah, just to add to that, so me and Jane did an extensive consultation period, which we've kind of touched on, but we talked with service users, we talked with family, friends, professionals. We went into prisons, didn't we, to talk to both staff and prisoners around, what would they like to see changed at Aspire? And one of the main things was make it easy for me. Don't let me go through all these hoops to get into treatment. Reduce the assessment time, reduce the amount of assessments, and the group work. Some people don't like group, so they have to come to these welcome groups. So, we've took that out. And also, we've got hubs out in, as people know, we've got hubs out in Bentley, Mexborough, and we've got out in Thorn as well. So we're trying to make it more accessible for people rather than coming into town all the time.
And are you seeing results now from those changes?
Yeah, the new contract starts in April.
But we haven't waited, have we?
No, we haven't waited. So it starts in April, and it's a 5-year contract. It's with the current provider, which is, as you know, is Ardash, in partnership with ADS.
But so some of the work that we've done, like we've mentioned about the outreach team, we're already getting some good feedback with sex workers cohort in particular to say, oh, thank goodness I can actually go in, I can get what I need, and there's some support and wrap around with that. So it's smaller steps, but yeah, we're definitely seeing improvements already before the initial contract fully starts.
And there were simple things like, if somebody didn't turn up within 5 or 10 minutes of an appointment, they were like, well, you can't come in. And when we're talking about people from, working, sex workers or working, Amber Project, these people don't have watches like we do. So, as I say, we're just trying to make it as easy as possible to get the treatment they want, when they want it, and how they want it.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I think that comes from you, Steve.
I think it's already been addressed, really, and it's reassuring to know that police and everybody in St Ledger are all working for a common goal, which is absolutely bang on. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Next theme, we are looking at reducing crime and reoffending in Doncaster. So I know I think, Tom, you touched quite a bit about the concern of the number of offenders continue to reoffend once leaving prison and measures in place. Not just to repeat the question and get the same answer again. I know you mentioned about there is a departure lounge in one of the prisons. Obviously, that has a bit of an impact on there. it'd just be a question like why we're not mirroring it in other, because we've got quite a few prisons in the borough really, and it'd be good to get something mirrored, because obviously Doncaster's a bit of a hub for all the prisons, isn't it, in a destination. If we're having it there, obviously we might also get reoffending from us who have been from prison from those. It'd be good to have something implement there, just get information there, and then anything else you want to add that wasn't addressed in your report as well.
No, like you say, I don't intend to repeat. I've gone through that, the structure of how we reduce reoffending. I suppose all I say, I'll come to the prison-specific question in a minute. In terms of reducing offending, that's a massive piece. We've heard about all the drugs work that goes on in the background. We've talked about IOM, but probation don't just work with that 209 people. They work with anyone who's released from prison under sort of terms of probation. So it is an enormous piece of work. So there is a huge amount ongoing. I think if you look at the work that the police do, but then you look at, we talk about the police, don't we, but then we've got our local MPTs who are all working on their specific issues and problem solving. So I do think it's not, what I want to emphasise is not just that IOM approach. That is a way of dealing with a very specific cohort of people, but it's obviously much wider than that. In terms of the prisons, it's a good question. So it was set up, that departure lounge was set up before my time here. Doncaster has a high throughput in terms of the type of people who are in Doncaster and the sentences they're on. Some of the other prisons, you don't actually generally get discharged from them because you end up being downgraded into a different category, and those prisons have a sort of specific programme to get people ready for release. I think it's one for us to look at, and I will go away and look at exactly what we could take from the approach in Doncaster in the other prisons. But I think lots of the needs are already met. So Hatfield, for example, is an open prison, so the lowest category prisoners, when they get downgraded over time and demonstrate good behaviour and come to the end of the sentences, they are managed through a programme at Hatfield in a way that they aren't at Doncaster, because they're on shorter sentences at Doncaster. But I will come back with a bit more detail around it.
Yeah, that would be good, because it'd be good to get a bit of a breakdown as well, and then we kind of know what's happening with the prisons and the reoffending. There is just another question onto that, actually, I forgot to also ask as well. I know you mentioned briefly about, was it Flex? That was the free, yes. Oh no, sorry, it's not Flex, it was the free cohort. You mentioned a lot of those offenders are like DA, like today. What is, I mean, we talked about other departure, but what happens to those offenders who are DA?
So there's a whole structure that sits around DA, separate to kind of the IOM, because DA, we know, there's lots of challenges with it. There's lots of support needed. Victims, there's a lot in terms of victim support that goes on in the background. When you've got DA offenders on the free, it's because they're tending to commit serious acquisitive crime offences as well. So it's a small cohort who overlap there. So they will have all of the normal MARAC, MATAC, all of the structures that South Yorkshire Police and partners have in place for domestic offenders. It's that in the background they also have an indexed serious acquisitive crime offence as well. But they might not meet the threshold in terms of the score, but we think, given that overlap, they're important enough that they get put onto that specific cohort.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the question.
I think so. I'll have to read a bit more.
We can talk about it if there's further. We can talk about it.
Great. Has anyone got any questions on this part? Okay, no. Ken, you've got one question on what is in place to address the youth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel, for a very useful presentation. Just regarding youth reoffending and youth offending, we've talked a lot this morning about reactive work that's taking place. I'm more interested in proactive stuff, and if we're doing anything, what's being done to support young people and stopping them from becoming involved in criminal activities. Are there any informal educational projects, schemes around, any community work, school work, and any sort of action and consequences work that's taking place to steer young people away from criminality? Thank you.
I think when you look at some of the things we've referenced in the presentation today, I think we've listed quite a few things there where we are clearly engaging with young people. The work that we've been doing through EPIC is key in terms of the service that they provide, and that diversionary work that they do across the borough is really significant for us, and I think that pays us great dividends, certainly in diverting kids away from knife crime and things like that. So we've seen some real benefits there. I think from our point of view, from a policing point of view alone, not even thinking of wider partners, we look at the engagement activity that we do through our local neighbourhood policing teams at schools and the engagement surgeries that we run locally are really significant to that work. But then wider in terms of that other work, Bill referenced the videos that are being produced to try and deter kids from riding off-road bikes, for example. There's a whole heap of activity around that sort of broad piece. Beyond what we presented in the PowerPoint, I don't know if you have anything else, Bill, that you'd want to highlight.
Yes, if I may. Obviously, a lot of the work around working with young people is managed through the youth offending team, which is obviously a joint partnership team. We also have some layers for the young people that may be in danger of being exploited or drawn into serious criminality. So we have what's called a multi-agency child exploitation meeting, the MACE meeting. So a lot of the cases where a lot of agencies have said we're worried about this individual, we're really concerned about the fact that they're out in the early hours of the morning, for example, they're mixing with the wrong people. There might be other indicators as well in terms of what's happening at home, what's happening at school. So schools have got an input in that as well. And those cases will be brought to that partnership meeting where there is more intensive activity in relation to them and some of the prevention programs. So it could be one-to-one work, it could be work through the EPIC team, etc. So, you know, we've got various layers of how we pick up on these cases. And the important thing for me is the referral mechanism so that agencies and partners are aware that if you come across a child or young person who you feel is in danger of being exploited or, you know, has got some issues that are ongoing. And it might be something as simple as being part of a group of people, for example, the French Gate Centre, you know, who is this young person? Which school do they attend? Are parents aware of, you know, where they are and what they're up to, etc. So there's a whole multi-agency approach to it, because for me, this is one of the important things about, you know, managing crime and reoffending, particularly young people, is if we can stop that young person being involved in more serious criminality, then that's going to have a massive impact, not only in that young person's life, but also in communities and also in families. So for me, it runs at the heart of everything that we do.
And just to add to that, we have the turnaround programme. So that is specifically dealing with low-level offending referrals of youths, trying to then engage them to stop them carrying on to prevent more serious offences. So they work through packages of work with young people who wouldn't normally get some support from social services. And it can focus on all sorts of different things in terms of interventions that are offered to them. There's a triage panel that those cases are reviewed at. And then there's the different disposal routes for that youth to go down. So it might be that they get emotional identification, regulation support, things around substance misuse, sexual health, some sort of positive activities, speech and language inputs, dyslexia screening, counselling services. There's lots of different other wider provisions to try and catch them if they have committed some lower level offending, catch them and then stop them reoffending at a more serious rate as well. So I think that's one of the key things. If someone from the youth offending team was here now, they'd probably want to talk to you about.
Okay, any other final questions? Okay, well, thank you for that panel. Been an interesting presentation, and thank you for giving more details to our questions. Just now to ask about recommendations on paragraph 9 of the report. Crime and Disorder Committee is asked to comment and note the information contained within the report and presentation, which provides an update on the Safer, Stronger Doncaster Partnership theme group activity. Do members feel they have undertaken this task, and have they got any other further recommendations? Nope. Okay, so can we agree? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. Feel free, if you want to stay, we've only just got one part of the agenda, which is just to overview and scrutinise work plan as part of the forward plan of the key decisions. Christine, is there anything to make note of?
No, Chair, the work plan's there just for your information. As you know, we're getting towards the end of the civic year. If there's anything that members are particularly passionate about and wish for us to put forward next year for the work plan, then please let myself, the Chair, Caroline know, and we can keep a note of that. And just to also note that the first meeting is about beginning of August sometime, but we are looking at flooding and inviting partners along to that meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have started to make a list of subjects to look through next year, even though I might not be the chair, depending on how it works. But if anyone wants to add to that list, we can pass it through to Christine, ready for next year. Okay, I'll thank you for that, and I think we'll end the meeting. Thank you.